25. Historian. The central claim of the end of history theory is that history has reached its final stage of development. According to its adherents, democratic ideals have triumphed over their rivals, and history is effectively at an ideological end. But this view fails to consider that it is impossible to stand outside all of history to judge whether history is really at an end. Which one of the following can be reasonably inferred from the historian's statements? A. We can never know whether the end of history theory is true. The last sentence is saying, hey, it's impossible to stand outside all of history to judge whether history is really at an end, right? So if it's impossible to stand outside of history to judge, then we can never judge, right? Because it's impossible to judge. So that, I think, would mean that we can never know whether the end of history theory is true, right? I take that back. Okay, this is saying this view fails to consider, right? This historian's actually implying that this view is failing to consider this. So I don't know if it's saying that this theory can never be true. I kind of like A. I already circled it, so we'll leave it circled, but let's see. Now I'm feeling a little bit hesitant. B. Advocates of the end of history theory have too ideological an understanding of history. Okay. Too ideological. Do they ever say too ideological? They say that the advocates of this theory think that history is basically at an ideological end. Did the historian criticize them and say, oh, it's too ideological? No, right? He just said, hey, these people think democratic ideals have triumphed over their rivals and history is at an ideological end. The historian doesn't really criticize that or say that they are too ideological, right, in terms of their understanding of history. So B is wrong. C, if we were at the end of history, we would automatically know whether the end of history theory is true. Ooh, okay. C can be kind of tricky, but C is bad causal reasoning. So they're telling us actually that to know whether history is at an end, right, to judge, like if we wanted to judge, then we have to be outside, right? To judge, we have to be outside. Just because we are outside, just because we are at the end, doesn't necessarily mean that we would automatically know, right? It just says we can judge. So actually, it's not even, it's really bad conditional reasoning because it changes judge to know. And it's, mixing up sufficient for necessary as well on top of that. So that definitely doesn't work. D, if it is impossible for the end of history theory to be true. Oh, sorry, it is impossible for the end of history theory to be true. I mean, that's just really strong, right? I mean, the author never directly says it's impossible to be true. It just says this view fails to consider something. But that thing that it fails to consider, we can never prove it or disprove it. So I guess the entire theory then can never be proven or disproven. So that makes A seem even better. D is a little bit strong, right? It's impossible for the theory to be true. It's impossible for us to stand outside of history to judge, but is it impossible for the theory to be true? That's too strong, right? We don't know whether the theory can be true. We just can't judge whether it's true or not, right? Based on our limitations. So D is also probably not our answer. E, ideological developments are the essential elements of history. Do they ever say they are the essential elements? Let's see if they even use the word essential or anything like that. The central claim of the end of history theory. They talk about the central claim of a theory, but they never really say, something is an essential element of history, right? So E is also not our answer. So our answer here would be A.